Craft matters. In small ways, like how a coffee is brewed. And in not so small ways, like how your money is cared for. Which is why for 160 years, UBS has elevated banking to a craft. Tailoring unique strategies that combine human expertise with the latest technologies. All happening across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs. With you at the heart of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 10th of October 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, France will be given, we believe, a new Prime Minister today, who will take on one of the most poisoned chalices in politics. Also ahead, in the next 60 minutes, the latest on the peace deal in the Middle East as the Israeli cabinet agrees to a ceasefire with Hamas. Plus,
and we can become that message of hope to promote peace and unity throughout our world.
Pope Leo chooses the Middle East as his first international destination for travel. And
the core of Alfred Nobel's vision was the belief that committed individuals can make a difference.
We look ahead to the announcements of this year's Nobel Prize for Peace and ask if any winner can be free of controversy. All that plus the film news, what we learned, and the papers too. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else we're following in today's news. The US President Donald Trump and his Finnish counterpart Alexander Stubb have signed an agreement for the US Coast Guard to acquire up to 11 icebreaker ships. An earthquake magnitude 7.4 has struck the Philippines, triggering a tsunami warning in several neighbouring countries. And Peru's Congress has voted to impeach the president, Dina Boluarte, whose current approval rating stands at 2 to 4%. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, by the end of today, with any luck, France should have a new Prime Minister. And as a result, its politics set on a more even keel. How this will happen is still unknown. Last night, France's socialists were claiming only they had the key to unite the country. The far right was describing the situation as a pathetic comedy, however, that could only be resolved by a snap parliamentary election. Well, to gaze into the crystal ball, I'm joined now from our Paris studio by Monocle's Paris bureau chief there, Simon Bouvier. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning. Gazing into the crystal ball, my specialty.
Well, let's have a look. Le Parisien is having a go. Just looking at their front page this morning, the breaking news is that Macron is going to be inviting party leaders to the Élysée Palace at 2:30 this afternoon, but will be excluding the far-right National Rally to the meeting. What more do we know about what's actually on the cards today?
Correct. And also excluding the far-left La France Insoumise party. So he's... essentially, I think critics would say he's trying the same thing that he's been trying since the beginning of this political crisis, post the early elections that he called last summer. So from the left, we'll have Mr. Boris Vallaud from the Socialist Party, representatives of all of the different factions, including Marine Tondelier, the leader of the Green Party, from the Central Bloc, who used to be united behind the president, but is now somewhat fractured. We'll have Gabriel Attal, of the former prime minister. Of course, he was prime minister when Macron called these early elections last year. Mr. Bayrou, the former prime minister as well. Édouard Philippe, also a former prime minister, but from his first term. So there's going to be a lot of people at the Élysée today starting at 2:30 to try and find what option they hate the least. I think we've been talking a lot on Monocle Radio these days about French political culture and how ill-suited it is to the kind of consensus building, Emma, that is necessary in a situation like this. Now we're back to our old ways. We always complain that picking the president is more about eliminating the person that we dislike the most. In this case, I think it's going to be the political parties eliminating the option that they dislike the most, which is new elections, new polls show that the Rassemblement National would be the big winners and that almost everybody else would lose seats. So I think that is the stick that President Macron is wielding today.
Not to make too much light of what is clearly a deep, deep political crisis, is there anyone left to take the Prime Minister's job?
I mean, Emma, the jokes online about who's going to be appointed. Yesterday, there was a ceremony at the Panthéon in Paris to accept Édouard Badinter, the former justice minister and the man responsible for abolishing the death penalty in France. He was honored in a ceremony there, but of course, he has passed away a number of years ago. There were jokes online saying maybe he should be the prime minister because right now nothing else seems to be working. So there are a few names making the rounds, and one that in the last couple of days has been kind of pronounced insistently is Jean-Louis Borloo, a former minister, a former mayor of Valenciennes, a businessman. He's the owner of the Valenciennes Football Club, who has a kind of maverick profile that could potentially appeal to the left and to the right. A number of figures from the right, including the president of the Les Républicains party, former interior minister Bruno Retailleau, said he would be open to a Borloo nomination. But there is also the possibility that Macron might rename Sébastien Lecornu, who famously just resigned after 27 days in office, but with a very different government. I think the name of the game here is how do they get a budget past Parliament? They have until Monday, so this upcoming Monday, to present it to Parliament.
It's an incredibly difficult situation insofar as Macron seems to be insisting on pushing on either a sort of a central or a technocratic approach in order to get the austerity budget through. But as you say, it does not square with the way that French politics sits at the moment.
Yes. Again, I think that all of the chaos of the last few days is mostly due to the fact that all of these parties and the personalities within them are jockeying for position in the presidential elections that are going to be happening in 2027. Even though voices calling for President Macron to resign have grown from being ultra fringe to being a little bit louder. In my estimation, there's absolutely no way he will set the precedent that a democratically elected president can be pressured politically into resigning before the end of his term. So he will not leave, in my estimation, before 2027. Macron won't. So it's going to be more of the same unless we could find a way forward. And I do think that this is not to your advantage if we go to other early elections. I have the power to call them tomorrow if you mess with me. So let's get around the table and get this budget passed. I think that might be an approach that French political culture can understand, let's say. And
indeed the French economy can stand, because if you look at the papers yesterday, I think there's one headline that says France has stopped spending because it's worried about rises in taxes, an austerity budget either being passed or not being passed. It creates massive uncertainty. And the economy is reeling, because I think the stock market tumbled on Monday when Lecornu stepped down.
Yes, I think that it's, as I wrote in the Monocle Minute this week, I think this is a new phase as far as the markets and the world of business here really is concerned, where they're thinking, okay, well, we knew that things were going to be unstable, but this bad, where parties say one thing and 24 hours later they withdraw their support over what seem to be trivial matters, if things devolve into kind of naked partisan plays, then they don't have any visibility over what's going to be happening in the months ahead. So hopefully, I think the objectives now are way more modest than they were the last few times around in this election of the prime minister. Can we get a budget through by the end of the year? And then the rest is detail. That's how bad the situation is.
Finally, while we've got you, Simon, what else are you following today in the Paris Bureau?
Well, wouldn't you like to know, Emma? Today I'll be working on a secret project for the December-January issue that I cannot tell you about too much. But I'll also be meeting with a couple of writers, including Thomas Chatterton Williams, our friend and Monocle Radio contributor, to see what he's been up to.
We look forward to all the secrets being unveiled. Thank you so much. Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief Simon Bouvier there, joining us from Rue Bachermont. You're listening to The Globalist. An update now on developments in Gaza as Israel's Security Cabinet voted to formally agree to a ceasefire in Gaza after a 2-year conflict. Large crowds gathered in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv last night in anticipation of an announcement that the remaining hostages will be released by Hamas and will return home to Israel. Hamas has reportedly been given assurances that the conflict is now permanently over. Meanwhile, a ceasefire is expected. The UN is expected to deliver large lorry loads of aid into Gaza. And it's also been announced separately that Pope Leo is to make his first international visit next month to Turkey and to Lebanon, bringing the region into sharp focus. Well, I'm joined now from Istanbul by Monocle's Istanbul correspondent, Hannah Lucinda Smith. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Let's just assess where we are this morning in terms of Gaza. We have the Israeli Security Cabinet agreeing to a ceasefire.
Yeah, a really, really key development this morning, the ceasefire deal, the 20-point plan that's been drawn up by the US, Qatar, Turkey, various countries kind of coming together. That's been approved. It's been ratified by the Israeli cabinet. A ceasefire now is expected to come into force within the next 24 hours and within the next 72 hours. At least Israel hopes those hostages might start being returned.
And this was the last step to set the deal in motion, wasn't it? This crucial meeting inside the Israeli Security Cabinet. But it wasn't just them. There was the US envoy Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner who were in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I mentioned before, also Turkey, Qatar and Egypt particularly played a big role in this. Here in Istanbul, there was plenty of news on Wednesday night of Ibrahim Kalin, who's the head of the Turkish intelligence services and very, very close to Erdogan, going to Qatar to meet with Hamas to put this to them. And it was, of course, finally accepted to them. So, yeah, the real push has come from Trump and, of course, from his envoy, Steve Witkoff. But also it's been regional actors as well playing their part.
And indeed, there is a sense, isn't there, that this could actually be a moment when there is a turning point in the history of the Middle East. Is that overestimating the magnitude of what's just happened?
I don't think so. I think, if it stands, this is a really, really significant moment. Of course, let's just, put in some context. There have been other ceasefire deals. They haven't stood. They have all fallen apart. This one does seem to be more substantial. And of course, if we're going to look more widely, as you said, of course, the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and particularly what's happened since October the 7th, is really at the basis of so much of what has gone on in the Middle East. I think, there are other things going on, particularly, the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria nearly a year ago now, really, really kind of shook up the power lines in the Middle East. But this is a really, really major thing. It's one thing when you go across the region, you talk to anybody, not just Palestinians, kind of anyone on the Arab street. This is something that they really kind of feel viscerally, the plight of the Palestinians. They don't see it as, something happening to people in another country. They really feel it as something that's happening to their community. And really, until this conflict is put to bed, I don't think there's any kind of hope of lasting peace across the region.
Is there a sense, though, that various other countries are able to now feel as if they can take the pressure off Israel a little? The fact that Israel has agreed to a ceasefire, the fact that the Israeli Defense Forces will pull back, and also the fact that Palestinian prisoners will be released in exchange for those absolutely vital hostage returns to happen.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, there's going to be some amount of cynicism, of course, because, as we mentioned, previous ceasefires haven't held. But I do think, everyone is really going to be hoping this holds. And, you've got to give Israel a little bit of space to allow that. But I mean, on the other hand, it's not just in Gaza where Israel is kind of enacting this policy of pressure on the Palestinians. Also in the West Bank, we're seeing those land grabs continuing, huge amount of criticism on that from other countries. And I think, Gaza is one thing, but I think there has to be a kind of turnaround in Israel's state policy as well.
Let's move on to this announcement that Pope Leo, the new Pope, is going to make his first international visit next month. And the two countries that he has chosen are Turkey and Lebanon. Is there a reason why?
Yeah, so the official reason, in Turkey, the Pope is going to be going to a city called Izmit. It's not far from Istanbul. It's quite an unremarkable city, apart from the fact that 5 years ago, an ancient basilica, millennia and a half old basilica, re-emerged from the waters of a lake close to there. Quite incredible photos if you want to look it up. It's called St. Neophytus. A really, really holy site. Officially, of course, that's the reason why the Pope will be going to Turkey first. But, underlying that and linked to what we've just been talking about is this kind of, broader conflict in the Middle East, the broader unrest in the Middle East, of which, of course, Christians have been a large part. We've seen in Syria, a huge part of the Christian community there has fled the country, also in Lebanon, also in Iraq over the past 20 years. So I think this is really, really symbolic at a time where the Middle East has been through a huge amount of chaos, a huge amount of upheaval, but also, there is this kind of glimmer of hope. It's hugely significant that the Pope's choosing these two countries to go to first.
And the fact that the Pope is, we have to sort of place this in the context of his predecessor, don't we? Pope Francis, who was very vocal when it came to the conflict in Gaza. He was condemning, and I'm quoting here, condemning this shameful humanitarian situation, expressed his desire for a ceasefire and maintained regular contact with the small number of Christians who live in Gaza. This was something that Pope Francis did not shy away from when it came to speaking out. Where do we think Pope Leo can take this or will take this?
Well, I think that's something that he is going to really kind of show on this trip. And his people have already said that he wants to express and affirm his identity as a Christian in a world of many different creeds where all people, regardless of religion and race, are called to live together in mutual understanding. Now, clearly, that is not as strong a statement as the kind of thing that we got used to hearing from Pope Francis. It's very much about unity, it's about peace, it's about reconciliation. But I think, we'll have to watch very, very closely what he says in Turkey and also in Lebanon to get a sense of, whether he is going to be as forthright as his predecessor.
And there is something, yesterday he welcomed a group of journalists to visit him at the Vatican. And the message that he gave out there was that journalists need access to report events which we need to see. And he said that if we know what is happening in Gaza, we know what is happening in Ukraine and every other land blooded by bombs, we largely owe it to journalists. This is not an easy line to say in Turkey.
It is not, and it will be interesting to see whether he repeats that. I mean, of course, from Turkey's point of view, if you just look at that statement as it is, they would absolutely agree with that. They would say, yes, journalists do need to go into Gaza. They would probably even talk about press freedom. They would talk about the fact that, some of, there are Turkish members of parliament on the flotilla that Greta Thunberg has been part of as well. They would say that was part of the same thing. But of course, when you talk about internal Turkish politics, they would probably say something quite different. Turkey has, over the recent years, been the biggest jailer of journalists in the world. That's still the case, even if it's, not the biggest. It's got also many, many opposition politicians in prison. And President Erdogan does tend to react quite forcefully when anyone from the outside criticises that. So I think, if the Pope is going to walk a kind of careful line and keep his relations in Turkey good, probably we won't hear so much about the journalists in Turkey.
And finally, the relationship between Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Donald Trump notwithstanding, it is interesting that in the last few months, and indeed last few days in particular, the focus on America's ability to bring about or to attempt to solve intractable problems has been highlighted. This peace agreement that has been agreed to, has been struck, is being called the Donald Trump agreement. And now we have an American, Pope Francis, going to the region where in the past, dare we say it, that American involvement has not always been welcome.
It hasn't. And, what's really, really interesting is that on the one hand, Donald Trump was meant to be about America first and, no more dumb wars, things like that. And on the other hand, as you say, we're almost seeing sort of American foreign power growing in the region. We're seeing Donald Trump as the president who's managed to bring these very, very strong, difficult characters to the negotiating table. Also, as you say, an American pope as well, going on this very significant outreach tour. I think this is going to be the other interesting thing. Just what kind of form is American power and influence in the Middle East going to take over the coming years? Clearly the era of, military intervention is well in the past. Nobody in America or in the Middle East wants that. But clearly America still does have a role to play, and particularly with the figure of Donald Trump, with his, very, let's say, special relationships with figures like Netanyahu, like Erdogan, figures who are really sort of cut from the same cloth as him, the strong man, bombastic, prefers doing their deals in sort of back rooms, personal relations. So it's going to be interesting how that kind of American influence carries forward in the Middle East.
Monocle's Istanbul correspondent Hannah Lucinda Smith, thank you so much for joining me on the line. Still to come on today's programme.
We learned that though it may feel like we have, as a species, done little with the last decade or so other than listen to Donald Trump, we should have listened to him earlier.
Andrew Muller will be here to bring us his guide to the last 7 days in What We Learned. Stay with us on The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office House View, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
8:21am in Zurich, 7:21am here in London. Let's have a look at the papers. Joining me in the studio, Steve Crawshaw, author, journalist and formerly Human Rights Watch UK director. Good morning,
Good
Steve.
morning.
Equipped with printouts, ladies and gentlemen of the articles.
I'm so old-fashioned. I still live in the 20th century, I swear to you.
I don't think you do, actually. I think you just sort of live in quite a sensible place. Welcome to the studio. You smiled then when you listened to Hannah Lucinda Smith telling us about Pope Leo going to Lebanon and Turkey, and you're in the middle of writing an epilogue to a book that has only just got the ink dry on it.
Yeah.
And this is all about the unusual moments that we're experiencing in the Middle East.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. Very interesting conversation you were just having there. Among many other things, the book, which is about war crimes and justice and kind of what can be achieved and what cannot be achieved, it was very obvious to me in the epilogue chapter I'm just writing, which is basically the year of Trump. It came out in February, the original book. Trump was the negative factor in absolutely everything. We're now all having to adjust the fact that this slightly, more than a slightly crazy guy may have helped unlock certain things. But on the one hand, there's lots of stuff, as you were just discussing there, so many question marks in the air. But also very interesting to me with the war crimes and justice angle is, does that then mean that people go, you know what, this business of holding people to account for the crimes, let's just move on for that? And I think that would be very, very dangerous if that happens. I hope it won't, but that will certainly be Trump's instinct, who loves impunity in every shape and form.
And this is a difficult question of timing that the world's newspapers are trying to fathom at the moment, because there does need to be that time for relief and for celebration that there is a ceasefire being agreed, that the guns will fall silent and that aid will go into Gaza. Haaretz, I think you wanted to draw our attention to this story. And the headline says, for Palestinians, the relief of the Gaza ceasefire belongs to others. Two peoples will wake up under very different skies, one free to heal, the other trapped in the ruins. So just the magnitude of the problem is laid bare now.
Yes, exactly. Haaretz, as I've said before, and indeed in conversation with you as well, I find so interesting is this Israeli paper which brings such a humane perspective, and I think is valid, is important for all of us to read. And I think, as you say, it kind of goes to the heart of it with that. These are two overlapping stories, but very, very different stories. And as she says in that piece, that the Israelis can now go on to heal, but for the Palestinians took their first deep breath in 2 years, not because they felt safe, but because they had survived. And the word end feels hollow, and for all the obvious reasons. And I think that sense of like, how do we actually get stability? And justice, of course, is not the only thing that brings stability. But what we've seen, not just here, but in so many other contexts, is the lack of justice fosters so much instability and violence in the years to come. That's something which Trump undoubtedly, with his transactional approach, doesn't understand. But I hope that other politicians may do.
Let's move to a story, an absolutely outstanding article written by Radosław Sikorski, who's Poland's Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Minister of Poland, writing an op-ed in the New York Times about the fact that while the world's focus is on the Middle East, understandably, Vladimir Putin is still pressing on with his offensive in Ukraine. And there are reports overnight that there has been a huge attack on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Power cuts are in action. And one wonders whether you think that the timing is very deliberate.
He is a very, very smart politician. Educated partly here in Britain, he understands the world very, very well, Radek Sikorski, Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, as you say, and the timing of this for the New York Times, as you quite rightly say, is clearly very, very consciously done. The messaging is so important that it's like, okay, you are looking and focusing properly on this one, but if you don't look at what's happening in Ukraine, you'll be losing the plot completely. It's for the New York Times, so above all, it's for the American audience. It's directed very directly at the White House, not to be kind of doing the soft soaping of Putin. But I think at one remove, probably, it's also for European politicians who, of course, have taken a very different view from Putin. But I think there is the worry of like, can we just move on and kind of leave this behind, as it were? And yes, the Ukrainians will suffer, but because at the moment, Western Europe is not feeling the pain of that war. But as we've seen with the drone provocations, which he highlights, this is something which can still spread across.
He highlights, he discusses the possibilities of how to resolve this conflict. And one thing he says, it is possible to negotiate with Russia. First, though, you have to show force, and only then can you have dialogue. He reaches back into the past. He talks about Reagan and Gorbachev ending the Cold War, but the Americans had absolutely had to sort of break Russia militarily and economically and challenge the whole ethos of the Soviet Union before anything could happen. And he's saying this is what has to be done with Putin.
Yes, exactly. So it's super interesting. I was actually just a few weeks ago, I was at the Warsaw Security Forum where he was speaking and the Prime Minister there was speaking, and a lot of senior Europeans and some seniorish Americans were there, where that sense of this pressure needs to be put on was so strong. We hear it from the Poles, we hear it from the Baltic states, who've all been in that Soviet domain in greater or lesser terms in the past, the domain of Moscow. And the idea that if we just cozy up and if we kind of make him feel good, that'll be better. That, for many, many years, was the European and the American approach with Putin. It changed, of course, with the full-scale invasion. But this was still hearing from some politicians that, like, if we can just make that dialogue. And I think he's absolutely right. I don't feel a cold warrior in many other respects, but to be honest, on this particular thing, unless you put that pressure, things are not going to go anywhere good.
Let's stay with the New York Times. An article about weddings in Syria and shooting guns in the air as a celebration is they're trying to stop it.
I love this. So one remove, this is a book. A story about kind of war and peace and what happens at the end of a war, really. So gunfire at weddings is very, very common across the Middle East. Of course, it's a kind of this way of celebration. But equally, it's something which people often get killed from falling bullets or from things going wrong. And this was particularly true in Syria, where there were so many guns around. And there are extraordinary stories in this lovely, lovely piece that's been written, which is kind of a portrait of weddings now. And it's kind of about the rule of law coming in, because theoretically guns were always banned, but you just gave a few dollars to a militiaman and everything would be fine. And there's extraordinary stories there of how rocket-propelled grenades would be fired or hand grenades were being fired. This is about rules are here. You will not do this. You, if you're part of the groom's party, may be arrested if this happens. But it was interesting to see, even there, the rule of law isn't kind of quite all there. So one of these guys was part of the party was detained afterwards when there was some gunfire and had to hand in a gun. And the groom said, well, I don't have a gun. So he literally had to go and buy a gun in order to give that to the police. I was there a few months ago in Syria, and I found so interesting that sense of trying to rebuild normality in a whole range of different things, including like weird things like parking rules. And here we just have another example of that. I do hope that Syria can stay stable. It's had huge amounts of instability and continuing violence even after the end of Assad. But it's a place where people do hope for the best, for sure.
Steve Crawshaw, author, journalist and formerly Human Rights Watch UK director, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. The time here in London is 7:29am. A quick look now at some of the headlines we're keeping an eye on today. US President Donald Trump and his Finnish counterpart Alexander Stubb have signed an agreement for the US Coast Guard to acquire up to 11 icebreaker ships. The deal is intended to bolster US national security in the Arctic. An earthquake magnitude 7.4 has struck the Philippines, triggering a tsunami warning in several neighbouring countries. At least one person is believed to have been killed. Peru's Congress has voted to impeach its president. Dina Boluarte's current approval rating currently stands at between 2% and 4%. She's accused of illicitly profiting from her office. Peru has had 6 presidents since 2018. 3 of them are currently behind bars. Belgian police have arrested 3 people in their late teens and 20s suspected of plotting attacks with drones. The country's Prime Minister was reported to be one of the targets. And United Airlines is to offer new airline routes that connect the US directly to Croatia, Italy, Scotland, Iceland, South Korea and Israel. Starting next year, the new non-stop routes will provide US travellers with access to smaller, off-the-beaten-path locations. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Time now for a closer look at some of the other headlines we're following. Here's Robert Bound with a look at why we no longer drive convertibles.
As Europe starts to stack the garden furniture, snuggle into its merino and acknowledge the autumn with a tolerant shrug, it's time we took stock. The season of mists and mellow fruitfulness is doing Keats proud. Beyond the gate, the roads are still dry enough for a few weeks of four-wheeled fun, and the sun, when it does, shines warm enough to remind you it's a slim cousin of that blazing high summer blob. So you'd think, with a good times frisson, I know, I'll get the convertible out. But you won't, will you? Because you, like 99% of other drivers, don't have one. It's one of the summer's sadder statistics. People aren't buying convertibles anymore. As temperatures rise and the seasons continue to squabble over the copyright for spring and autumn, sales of that once beloved symbol of carefree motoring and summer escape, the head-turning topless model, have dropped like a stone. Now, the following are UK figures, because Britain is, despite a rainy reputation, easily the keenest top-dropping country around these European parts. But last year, just 12,173 new convertibles were registered in the UK. That's an 87% plummet in sales from peak cabriolet in 2004. That's making last year's the lowest figures for 2 decades. The number of models themselves available to purchase new has also fallen 50% since 2000, meaning that there are currently only 16 new convertibles with which to decorate your driveway. You'd have thought that all those lockdown puppies, now grown into stinking great Bernese mountain dogs, would need a little more wind-assisted ventilation, but no. Why have convertibles fallen out of favour? Isn't it that it's actually too hot to have the top down in the summer? No way, just wear a hat. Could it be the irresistible rise of SUVs, those family hatchbacks with a nasty little whey powder problem, their sales rising a seemingly steroid-assisted 543% since 2020? These big, bland cars have also ushered in the creeping gadgetification of the motor vehicle. Cars built more along the lines of smartphones than machines, all touchscreen serviceability and glassy anonymity. Or maybe it's the fault of EVs, whose fortunes have ridden a bumpy yet inexorably rising road. With their bulky batteries and built-in vibe of eco-sensoriousness, they don't quite conjure the wonder of going for a spin just for fun. Then again, there are plenty of alternatives to an electric shopping trolley. I spent a week grinning my way through northern Italy in an electric convertible Maserati last summer, and it was so fast and fun, but also had me weeping quietly on a snaking Strada Provinciale on the outskirts of Carrara. So bloody hell, just cut the roof off. It was different, wasn't it? I remember sliding around Goodwood in my uncle's Morgan, a wood-frame beauty that felt as organic as its materials. I don't think they made one with a roof. Careening around St George's Hill in the first MR2, the little Toyota that looked like, maybe it was, made from Lego. You put the roof in the boot and had to lay your tennis rackets across your legs. Design genius. Then my wife and I drove a roofless Mustang down Route 1 from Miami to Key West the day after we were married, where the warm Florida air dried our tears of joy. Or was that just a hangover? Either way, driving al fresco is just a gear change away from getting frisky. If you happen then to have a little in reserve, saved for a rainy day, do as they do with any endangered species and adopt a drop top, as if it's a snow leopard or a Sumatran rhino. Only, one that sits in your driveway yearning to be pointed down a twisty lane. There's such a wealth of high-value fun to be had in investing in fresh air and the future, because you did, in fact, save it all for a sunny day. For Monocle, I'm Robert Bound.
Thank you, Rob. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, just sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. 8:33 in Oslo, 7:33 here in London. So who will win this year's Nobel Peace Prize? Arguably the best known of the awards handed out by the committee, it's perhaps also the most contentious, given the huge amount of conflict and instability that the world is currently experiencing. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now from Oslo by Bruno Kaufmann, global democracy correspondent for the Swiss Broadcasting Company. A very good morning to you, Bruno. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Anna.
Tell us a little bit more about what the current situation is when it comes to the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize, given the fact that the events in the Middle East could be, they could shape the decision today or not.
Yes and no. The decision was already taken by the committee on Monday. And there is another reason why the decision maybe is not so up to date when it comes to the developments this week. The formal nomination for the prize had to be made by February 1. So that's quite a long time ago. And also the director of the committee yesterday said in an interview that the prize will mainly look into what has been achieved in 2024.
So explain a little bit, therefore, about who are the favourites and where we're looking to this year.
It's, of course, a lot of discussions are still done around Donald Trump's ambition to get this prize. He has expressed this wish every day. Last night in a press conference in the Oval Office, together with the Finnish president, he said again, I have finished 8 wars in 8 months and I should get this prize. But of course, he looks also into the case of his predecessor, Barack Obama, who got the prize during his first year in the presidency. So it's not totally excluded that Donald Trump should get the prize, but there are also many reasons why he shouldn't. There are the formal ones, but also that the criteria which the Nobel Committee is setting up, for instance, protecting media freedom, international law, climate protection, all these criteria are not the criteria Donald Trump is very strong on.
No, and the difficulty that the Nobel Committee faces, especially in this day and age, is that if you award the prize to somebody who is not politically, does not have agency, but is rather well-meaning and lacks teeth, then that removes the relevance of the Nobel Peace Prize. But if you do award it to a controversial figure, then that could make it even worse. So when it comes to the favourites this year, who do we believe are, what categories do they fit into?
I see the committee is really looking into possibly candidates, but also organizations which have been nominated. About 1/3 of all nominees of the 338 are organizations. And last year, for instance, a Japanese organization, Nihon Hidankyo, was awarded. It's an organization which fights against nuclear weapons in the war. So this year, there are many organizations which are discussed. One of the favorites is the Sudan Emergency Response Rooms. This is a civil society organization in Sudan, in war-ridden Sudan, who is working with the people on the ground, and they are called really like a network for peace. But we have also organizations protecting journalists around the world who are in wars, like the International Committee for Protection of Journalists. But there is also discussion if not a UN organization again, as before, should get the prize, an international court, for instance, like the International Criminal Court. So there are many options, but nobody knows what the decision is really made until 11 o'clock today.
Can you explain a little more about how the prize winner is chosen? You said it all had to be done several months ago.
Yes, this is a rigorous process which is also set out in the will of Alfred Nobel, this Swedish industrialist who died already in 1896. And since 124 years, this prize is given in Oslo alongside the other prizes which are given in Stockholm, the science prizes, the literature prize like yesterday. But the Peace Prize is very special because it can be a prize which encourages something, not just being awarded for services made as the other prizes. So during the phase of February 1 until September, the Committee of Five, it's a committee selected by the Norwegian Parliament. This committee is really looking into these different nominees, does a shortlist and do have some support from experts, but everything is in secrecy. There are no minutes, and everything which is documented is secret for 50 years. So we don't know really how the discussions are going. The only thing we will know will be the decision made public today.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the line from Oslo. That was Bruno Kaufmann, Global Democracy Correspondent for the Swiss Broadcasting Company. You're with Monocle Radio. And let's enjoy a little bit of theatre now. One of Shakespeare's greatest masterpieces, the tragedy King Lear, tells the story of family conflict, of the loss of power, age and loss of love. Well, this classic play is currently being staged in Tokyo by the British theatre maker Philip Breen. It marks the first Japanese production under his direction, offering a fresh and contemporary take on the tragedy. Well, Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi heard from Philip Breen in Tokyo.
My name is Philip Breen. I'm the director and adapter of the Bunkumura production of King Lear, the Kabuki-cho in Shinjuku.
When directing King Lear for this Japanese play, what kind of things did you think about? And why do you think it's meaningful for Japanese audiences to see this play today?
Well, first of all, King Lear is relevant in any context. And lines like, "Oh, sir, you are old," the idea of an older generation holding on to money and power while a younger generation waits in the wings for its moment, feels very relevant to where I'm from, UK, but also I think is quite relevant here in Japan as well. And also, in terms of the world politics, the play deals with a king giving away his power, much like the way America has given up its role in the world, and into that vacuum have stepped a series of all kinds of actors for good and ill vying for power in the vacuum. So both on a sort of very personal, like the play always is, on a very personal, on a very domestic level, relevant to many contexts, most contexts, but particularly to Japan, and on a political level also to world politics for me at the moment, along with the idea of the rise of new kings around the world with huge power of life and death over people's lives, So we have a new age of kings that have huge power over people's lives, and a lot of the way in which these new kings get their power is to tell people that they shouldn't or don't need to see things that they don't want to see. Part of the reason we love these kings is because they tell us we don't have to do certain things, we don't have to see certain things, we don't have to look at certain things. And this is a play about seeing, looking, speaking, not speaking, and that feels relevant to, again, that's always relevant, but particularly relevant to a world political moment.
Since King Lear was written in English, what challenges did you face in staging the play in Japanese?
Well, I speak a bit of Japanese, very not amazing, but enough to have a conversation, So that's made things interesting. But also, I know the play. So, for example, I can hear the play in English in my head whilst watching the Japanese actors do it. And there are things I simply can't control. I don't speak Japanese. I don't know the nuance of the language. But what I can say to the Japanese actors, well, this is what it's doing in English. This is what a line is doing in English. This is what I think Shakespeare's intention is. And so, what you always have is this very thorough act of translation, not just in terms of the text, but also in terms of the actors to the role and all the rest of it. And I find it, if Shakespeare is a foreign language to a lot of English people as well, and so there's a very, but strangely, English actors or English theatre people assume they know Shakespeare really well, and so you kind of maybe you imagine that the problem with directing abroad is that it makes it less clear, but in some ways it makes it more clear because nothing is taken for granted in terms of our understanding of the word, and so we go through a very, very thorough process. I've watched theatre all around the world in lots and lots of different languages, and I think anyone who goes to theatre can see good acting regardless of the language and the context and the culture. Yeah, I watch it in a very different way, and my work has changed a lot as a result of working here in Japan. It's become, I'd say, maybe much more visual, more poetic maybe.
I think English and Japanese have very different rhythms. Did that change your approach to directing the play in Japanese?
Well, for example, in English, I might discuss where stress lies in a word, or how to work to a line end. And of course, the sentence structure is entirely different in Japanese, with the verb at the end of the line. And as you can hear from the way I speak now, English is barrels forward joyfully, and your verbs are thrown in pell-mell. And so in some ways, it's a very good dramatic language in that sense. Japanese is, I think, instinctively much more considered because we're always going towards we're always heading towards the verb. So there's a shape of the sentence in your head that you have in Japanese that maybe you don't have in English. So I don't really have the same sort of minute control of minutiae in the text that I would have directing it in English. But in some ways, that's no bad thing. I can hear rhythm. I can spot whether a moment is true or not. I can spot whether a moment is dramatic or interesting. And 9 times out of 10, if an actor is lost, or a very good actor is lost, it's because the translation isn't good. Or it's amazing to watch the power of a great play like King Lear on the actors, work its magic on these great Japanese actors. And if they get a bit lost, it's normally because we haven't quite got the translation right.
Thank you. So finally, about the cast. To me as Japanese, many of them are very well-known Japanese actors. But King Lear is played by Shinobu Otake, a female actor, and the rest of the cast comes from different generations and different backgrounds. What do you think about these casting choices?
Well, the first thing's on the world stage, it's not at all unusual for hundreds of years now for the greatest female actors of their day to attempt the greatest roles. Ellen Terry played Hamlet. Recently there have been a number of high-profile women actors playing Lear on the international stage. Glenda Jackson played it in London. In terms of the history of Shakespeare, great women actors taking on great roles is not at all unusual. And of course, the very first King Lear would have been a 34, 35-year-old man in Richard Burbage. And so Lear is always created to a degree. It's very rare that you would get a man in his mid-80s playing that role. And actually, in Japanese theatre culture, it has a lot of women playing men and men playing women, both in the classical form, but also on the contemporary stage as well.
For Monocle in Tokyo, I'm Ryuma Takahashi.
Thank you, Ryuma, and thanks also to Philip Breen. King Lear is on in Tokyo now. You're listening to The Globalist.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS, banking is our craft.
It's time now on The Globalist for our weekly roundup of the news seen through the eyes of Andrew Muller. Here's what we learned.
We learned this week that the UK's Conservative Party, having spent a goodly proportion of this century demonstrating that they were unable to govern Britain, are also incapable of spelling it.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
Okay.
Tell me more.
Let's see where this goes.
We learned this from the wrapping of one of the freebies distributed to the meagre crew of gaunt, cobweb-covered weirdos who turned up at the Tories conference in Manchester, on current trajectory possibly the last such gathering before the one involving queuing resignedly for ladles of tainted Kool-Aid. Specifically, we learned that the proofreading of a wrapper of a conference-branded confectionery may have lapsed towards the lackadaisical.
This is a bar of chocolate. Thank you so much, Tories. When Labour negotiates, Britain loses. That is signed by Kemi Badenoch.
We learned that, yes, one reform of Britain that the Conservatives had proved capable of enacting, if only inadvertently, was slightly renaming it from Britain to Britian. Diligent as ever in our research, we at the What We Learned monologue on Monocle Radio put this refinement to a focus group.
Britian.
Britain.
Britain?
Wow.
Great.
Britain.
That's
a great idea.
Actually, maybe.
Yeah, that's correct.
That could be something.
What about Great Brian?
But even moving away from Great Britain, or if you will, the untied kindgum of Gerat Britian and Neathorn Iridnal, we learned that the global libertarian project was struggling somewhat with reality and indeed melody. We learned this from, yes, Argentina, specifically from Argentina's president, Javier Milei, who launched his latest book by taking the lead singer role in some sort of rock and roll concert.
Oh, no.
Afraid so. Appropriately, indeed possibly inevitably for someone who has always cultivated the haircut and leather jacket of the angry divorcee who plays the Jean-Jacques Burnel role in Buenos Aires' 7th Best Stranglers tribute act, President Milei subjected a crowd large enough to prompt speculation that the doors were bolted on the outside to an hour-long set of Argentinian rock standards, from which we learned that there is an hour's worth of Argentinian rock standards. At least one of which we learned sounds like this, at least when Milei sings it. Mallet. Is the original any better? No, it is not. Anyway, we learned that President Milei was seeking to incite interest in his new book, The Construction of the Miracle, a celebration of his economic plan, which, in absolutely glorious timing, hits the bargain bins just as Argentina has been compelled to seek a $20 billion bailout from the United States. So we learned, or at least surmised, that purchasers of Milei's book may be more likely, and would certainly be better advised, to burn it for warmth than read it. But sticking with the subject of presidents who have published book-length overestimations of their own expertise, we learned that though it may feel like we have, as a species, done little with the last decade or so other than listen to Donald Trump, we should have listened to him earlier.
There's a page in there devoted to the fact that I saw somebody named Osama bin Laden
and I didn't like it, and you got to take care of him. They didn't do it. A year later, he blew up the World Trade Center, so we got to take a little credit because nobody else is going to give it to me.
We learned, however, when we checked back on our copy of the book in question, which did involve extracting it from beneath the wobbly leg of the desk, that is how seriously we take our fact-checking, that this claim may not have been, strictly speaking, true, and may have been, strictly speaking, bollocks. We learned from leafing through our copy of the 2000 published The America We Deserve. Quite the fate-tempting title in hindsight. Can I get some general muttered agreement?
I think so.
That while it does contain a single mention of Osama bin Laden, it does not identify him as any singular threat, and nor at any rate was this any particularly piercing insight, bin Laden having been on the FBI's most wanted list since the year prior to publication. In fairness, however, it is difficult to blame Donald Trump for this misapprehension of the contents of The America We Deserve by Donald Trump. It's not like he's ever read it. But we learned that Trump's administration, in its pursuit of America's vicious, ruthless and imaginary enemies within, remains dauntless, and that no member of it is burdened by less daunt than White House Deputy Chief of Staff and almost heartbreakingly inevitable eventual fall guy for all of this nonsense, Stephen Miller.
When in our history have we tolerated unlawful riotous assemblies night after night around FBI buildings or ATF buildings or DEA buildings? This is the textbook definition of domestic terrorism.
When has the United States ever tolerated riotous assemblies around government buildings?
He has just returned to the White House and is signing a series of executive actions in the Oval Office, where he is pardoning some 1,500 January 6 rioters who have been convicted for participating in the attack on the Capitol 4 years ago.
For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Thank you, Andrew. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Finally on today's programme, a look at film news and Karen Krasanovic. Who else is joining me in the studio to go through the latest news from the world of cinema? Good morning, Karen. How are we?
I'm fine. I'm fine. A little deep in the throat, but otherwise everything's fine.
Excellent. So where are we going to begin? Well, let's begin internationally.
We could,
and the Golden Princess Hong Kong Cinema Classics Festival is on at the moment in Hong Kong. Tell us about it.
Yes. Well, it's quite important. It's an important festival, and it focuses on a lot of new and also some classic cinema. But I think that it's easy for people to sort of overlook the importance of Hong Kong cinema in general, and that's mostly Cantonese language rather than Mandarin. It's had a global impact in ways that we might overlook. For example, okay, not to drag us away from Hong Kong right now, because a lot goes on there all the time, but you know that the London Film Festival is on right now from the 8th to the 19th, and they have Never Too Late, which is a documentary. It's only about 80 minutes long by Ricky Choi, which is about getting back to nature. And I know that sounds kind of huggy and cute, but it's quite an important documentary. And it's great that it's on the LFF, because otherwise, how would we get a chance to see these sort of wonderful things? And I just want to say that it's not to be confused with the Elton John biopic of the same name, Never Too Late. But also the BFI, British Film Institute, has something called Seasons here in London, focusing on Hong Kong cinema. And there are 4 premieres, which I think are really, really important to be aware of. This is October and November. There's not only a 4K restoration of The Arch, which is in Cantonese, and it's a classic of Hong Kong cinema. It has a bit of a feminist sensibility, just have you know. There's also Possession Street, which is from 2024, which is a zombie film, another UK premiere. And from 2024, The Valley of the Shadow of Death, which is focused on faith, and that's another UK premiere. But the one that I'm really excited about is a 4K restoration of Hong Kong 1941, which is from 1984, which is Chow Yun-fat establishing his status in a breakthrough performance in this wartime drama in Cantonese. Now, do you remember the first time you saw Chow Yun-fat?
No.
I don't think, who is this guy? He's amazing. And if you have not seen him perform, you've got to go and see Hong Kong 1941.
You just catalogued a success story for Hong Kong film.
Yes.
What is it about Hong Kong film, Cantonese language film, that either sort of celebrates the Hong Kongness, or what defines it, what celebrates it?
Well, it not only has a British past, a British tradition, I suppose, but it also is embracing a previous Chinese and other Far Eastern cultures, and also the future as well as being part of China now, officially. And I think that kind of crossroads is what Hong Kong has always been very, I don't want to say niche, but there's talks now of it being sort of the major city in the Far East. If we can do we call it the Far East? Never sure what to call it. We're Hong Kong, there we go. But it is an extremely important venue, not only for trade, but also for culture. And also, it's just recovering now from COVID. Do you believe that, for the exhibitors, cinematically speaking?
Let's move back to Hollywood or head to the United States.
Okay.
The difficulties facing the creatives in Hollywood and the emergence of AI. AI seems to have sort of stolen a march here.
Yes, absolutely. Well, anybody that's seen these amazing videos, I suppose, AI creations of moving imagery is going to go, well, what's going to happen to Hollywood now? Because the way that we make films is not like that. So the Creative Artists Agency has taken a statement against, we all know about the AI actress that was put forward a few weeks ago at the Zurich Film Festival. They're saying now that they are really going to opt out of the AI frenzy, and they're saying that Sora 2, which is the AI that's been used to generate a lot of these characters in films, is a misuse of the technology, and that it's also problematic to copyright problems. As we knew.
Let's look at what we should be looking at, or what we should be sort of parting with our hard-earned cash and going to watch this month.
I'm going to be very old-fashioned about this.
Yes, this is. What should we go and see at the cinema this month,
okay.
Karen?
All right, be aware of VistaVision. It's an old camera from the 50s that's being shot as used for several important films, not only One Battle After Another, which you should have seen. You can see it at several venues in whatever city you're in VistaVision, and I urge you to do that. And also see The Flop, The Smashing Machine, because it is an amazing film.
Tell us about One Battle After Another.
And
why VistaVision makes it.
Oh, well, VistaVision, also Begonia, which is coming up next week, I think October 24th, is also shot in VistaVision. VistaVision is, instead of filming vertically, it films horizontally. And when you look at it, it is glossy and deep and analog looking. It's unlike a digital film, and it makes you feel as if you're there. It seems very real, as if the film is breathing. And if you're in London, you can go to the Odeon Lux Leicester Square, and the organist will pop up and play just before the movie.
Okay, that is now in the diary. The Smashing Machine, a flop, but
I saw it in Venice. It was my favorite film in Venice. It's Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, playing, I think it's Chris Kerr, who is a World Federation boxer, but mixed martial artist. And it's not the standard sports movie. It has a lot more morality and reflection in it, and I think it's a wonderful story. It's got Emily Blunt as his wife. It's Benny Safdie, one of the Safdie brothers, directing, and his brother is doing another sports movie coming up. So the Safdies are reworking the sports film genre.
Karen Krasanovich, thank you so much, as ever, for joining us in the studio. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Laura Kramer, Tom Webb and Chris Chermak. Our researcher was Joanna Moser and our studio manager was Steph Chungu, with editing assistance by Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, more music's on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time on Monday. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Advice is our craft.